Hello and welcome to Business Incorporated live on Channels Television. It's a Thursday, and you know what we do when we come here? We track the markets, the economy, and definitely we see how that affects your pocket. Here are the stories that set your agenda. Kenya and the U.S. near critical minerals deal as Ruto pushes value-added mineral strategy. Standard Bank eyes $15 billion Africa trade boom as cross-border commerce accelerates. And Sierra Leone closes only indigenous private bank over insolvency concerns. And great to have you join us this afternoon. I'm Will Ibang, and as always, we get a check-in on commodities. First, we see oil prices that continue declining after U.S. and Iran signed that deal, and also as the International Energy Agency is forecasting supply glut for next year. Let's look at natural gas prices. We see that up, however, 0.54% at $3.16. And we also see Brent crude, that's down 1.8% to $78.07 a barrel. WTI, that's down over 2%, $75.17 a barrel. Let's get a check-in on metal space and see how they are performing. Today, we see spot gold is down. Metals, precious metals, they're in the green, in the red, however. 2.21% down for spot gold, spot silver, and nearly 4% down platinum, 4% down palladium, 4.77%, copper is 1.35% down, $6.40. Let's check in on more commodities now. Today it's cashew nuts, and the price of a bottle of cashew nuts has increased by 23.08%. That's up from 6,500 naira to 8,000 naira year to date. FDC analyst Favor Adekunle joins us for this update. Favor, what factors are driving this price increase, and what is the outlook for cashew nut prices as we speak? So we still have Favor in the house, as in trying to join us there, but how much of these prices are we going to be seeing driving export earnings in Nigeria, especially where we see $400 million that contribution coming from there? But let's just check in now with Kenya, see them closing, finalizing that major agreement with the United States on critical minerals. President William Ruto has made this known to us. Now, the deal would support local processing of key resources, including rare earths, lithium, graphite, copper, and nickel, rather than exporting them in raw form. Ruto says discussions are progressing well, adding that the partnership aligns with Kenya's push for industrialization and greater value addition in its resource sector. Now, Sierra Leone's central bank has shut down Union Trust Bank, the country's only privately owned indigenous commercial bank, after declaring it insolvent. The Bank of Sierra Leone says the move follows years of failed efforts to stabilize the lender, which did not meet required capital and licensing standards. Governor Ibrahim Stevens says the bank had been under close supervision but was no longer viable to operate. We're seeing the closure mark a significant development in the country's banking sector that's been dominated by state and foreign lenders. Still in the banking space, Standard Bank says it is targeting a market worth about $15 billion as rising intra-African trade continues to open new revenue opportunities for the continent's largest lender. The bank is positioning its business around trade, finance, payments, foreign exchange, working capital lending, and cash management services, and that's supported by its footprint across multiple African markets. The bank's executives say the growth in cross-border trade among African economies is driving demand for more sophisticated banking and settlement solutions. Standard Bank expects its extensive regional presence to capture a significant share of its expanding trade-linked financial services market. We'll see how that goes for them. Good luck to them. And now let's look at what's driving cashew prices. Get a check in very quickly on the commodities space there. Favor, are you there now?
Good afternoon, Will. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Favor, just asking very quickly, give us an update, what's driving cashew prices and what the outlook is right now.
Okay, so you're right that the price of cashew nuts, a bottle of cashew nuts, has increased by 23% to 8,000 naira year to date. And this is a result of a number of factors. Number one is that cashew is a seasonal commodity, right, with its peak season usually spanning from the month of January up until mid-June. And we're seeing that it's beginning to go out of season, right? And this has led to an increase in the price of cashew nuts, coupled with the fact that we have high demand for cashew nuts, especially from countries abroad such as India, Vietnam, and the UAE. So that has led to the strong demand for that. And the second point is transportation costs, right? We've seen over the month about how fuel and diesel have increased. So transporting this commodity from states that are majorly produced in Kogi State is the largest producer of cashew nuts to the end producers and everything. This has led the increase in the price of fuel has led to an increase in the price of operational costs, right? So we are seeing that there is a deal being signed between the US and Iran, but it still takes months for us to get back to the previous way that we were before, irrespective of the progress in the US-Iran war. And lastly, there is insecurity, largely that have discouraged farmers, from farming on their farmlands, further reducing supply. So I'll say these reasons have contributed to an increase in the price of cashew nuts. And the outlook, like I said, it's out of season. It's getting to the point where it's generally going to be out of season especially from the month of, ending of June and July. And that coupled with other factors that I mentioned earlier on, would lead to a further increase, in the price of cashew nuts, especially since the transportation costs, it might take a while, before things get back to normal, like I said earlier on.
Definitely, would really like to know what the current price of cashew nut is in the market right now. Maybe just say a day, maybe a survey from yesterday to just give us an outlook what we expect, especially if I walk into a shop and I want to buy cashew nut. I don't know if you have that off the top of your head, but thank you so much, Favor Adekunle, analyst with FDC Financial Derivatives Company, for sharing those insights.
Thank you for having me.
And let's see markets now in Africa. We saw negative trading for major equities that we track at intraday. We say Nigeria down 1.14%, now below the support level that we had before. That's now 238.46 points. And see GSA in South Africa in the red at intraday 1.36%, 114,448 points. Let's look at EGX. They are closed. Today is the Islamic New Year in Egypt, and so the markets are closed there. They were closed yesterday in the green at 1.1% at 52,621 points. Now see Wednesday for the Kenyan exchange. We see them up 3.94%, trading in very positive territory. And let's turn our attention now to Nigeria's fixed income market, particularly to the results of Wednesday's Treasury bills auction, where investors staked about 1.86 trillion naira on a 1 trillion naira auction. Chuka Nwachukwu, chief dealer and head of trading UBA, joins us to break it down for us. Chuka, good afternoon. It's good to have you join us. Could you just run us through very quickly yesterday's NTB auction? We saw more than 89% of total subscription for the 364-day paper.
Yeah, so we have an NTB auction yesterday. Like you mentioned, 1 trillion was offered, and then about 1.8 trillion was the subscription, and 1.4 trillion was sold. The highlight of the auction was about 99 basis point movement of rate, especially on the longer end, from 16.35 to 17.34. Many analysts and many traders didn't expect such upward movement in yield. But again, looking at the inflation figure, which such is up slightly, it's expected that market will demand for higher yield, and that's what we saw yesterday at the auction.
Chika, I know we do have a slide that depicts this auction that happened yesterday. We saw the DMO raising more than 1 trillion naira, but again, the borrowing has been going up. But how significant is this borrowing level, especially in today's market conditions, seeing that the offer was about 50% up?
Yeah, so about 2 weeks ago, DMO raised the offer for about from 450 billion to 1 trillion, indicating that the government is looking to borrow more. And so we've seen that played out at the auction yesterday, where traders, investors demanded for higher yield. And so from the subscription, you could see that interest is there. The market itself, is quite bullish in terms of liquidity. So most of this liquidity, investors and traders obviously have to reinvest in the fixed income market, especially on the T-bill side. And so with government looking to borrow, especially with the election coming up, it's expected that the market will continue to demand for higher yield, and that's what we saw at the auction yesterday. Now, don't forget that obviously the 10% tax as well is also a factor. So all this, added together liquidity, government looking to borrow more, tax on the T-bill side, where we continue to see that and continue to see investors demand for higher yield. This same 1 year is currently trading on the secondary market at around the 17 level. So meaning that those who lost at the auction, came into the secondary market to fill in some of their demand.
Definitely, investors are cashing in on that, especially with these elevated yields that we're seeing. The more money we put in, the more money we expect to get out of it. Well, let's look outside Nigeria just very quickly to the U.S., where we saw Kevin Walsh having his first rate meeting as Fed chair. The hold stance that we saw, was that the expectation of market watchers here in Nigeria?
Fed held the monetary rate to 3.5%. So what that means for us is, especially the emerging market, is that it's going to it means a stronger dollar, and with stronger dollar, it's obviously going to affect capital inflow because most investors want to see that U.S. security, treasury bills and bonds, is high. Obviously, you want to invest in such in a market, and so for most investors, people see this as a hawkish move, meaning that within the now and end of the year, we see other rates, action on the rate, and that obviously will affect what is going to happen in our markets. But for Nigerian market especially, I do not see immediate impact. I think that our market is quite lucrative for most investors, and so the short disadvantages I just mentioned will not hit our market, not for the immediate future.
I was just asking, was that the expectation of market watchers? What is the rate hold? Was that what market watchers in Nigeria were expecting to see from the Fed chair?
No. Actually, market watchers expected its hike, especially with the inflation surging up after a lot of the Iraq, US, and Israeli war. So the economy has actually been affected, especially in terms of crude. So market watchers weren't expecting rate hold. Most market watchers is actually expected a rate hike. But again, that's, like I said earlier, will not have immediate effect in our market for now.
So I just want to ask, it was clear that there's no unified front in terms of the policy direction in the U.S. We see other Fed chairs giving some kind of forecast, but members of the Fed giving some kind of forecast, and the Fed chair not giving his own outlook or guidance on what inflation, if it's going to cut or hold rates this year. So what do you think that means, or that's signaling for us?
I think, like I said earlier, it signals a hawkish stand. So that will obviously affect the direction of our own market. Most emerging markets like us will expect, a stronger dollar will expect weaker currency, which is the Nigerian currency. So for us, we also have our own issues to deal with. So for the general market watchers, I think most investors will just be on the fence, take the stand of wait and see what what will happen. Don't forget that Donald Trump actually had issues with the former Fed chairman. So this guy seems to be someone he wanted. And so his policy direction will obviously be in line with what the president is looking to do. And so most industry watchers and most investors will want to, keep a wait and see approach before, making any trade decision.
Definitely wait and see position or outlook for the U.S. markets. Thank you so much, Chuka Nwachuku, Chief Dealer and Group Head of Trading at UBA, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
So now look at other markets now. Middle East markets, we see Dubai up very much in the green, over 2% at intraday. We see Abu Dhabi also in the green, 1%. Let's flip to other markets in the region. Saudi Arabia up marginally 0.07%, but we see Qatar index, the lone loser there, 0.61% down. Well, let's look at U.S. futures in pre-market trading today. They ticked higher with traders looking to recover after the Federal Reserve indicated the possibility of a rate hike this year, sparking a sell-off in equities during the previous session. S&P futures, we see that up nearly 1%, and we see the Nasdaq that rose 1.62%, and the Dow Jones is up 0.57%. Now, Intel, that surged 9% in pre-market after President Donald Trump said the company will partner with Apple on designing chips in the U.S. The Fed held rates steady, but that did not spoil the mood as much of the hawkish stance that we saw. We saw elevated inflation. That's marked because inflation is still elevated, so it's understandable that they would project a hawkish stance, and we hope that they get united so far in terms of the outlook for markets. But let's look at Asia very quickly. Asia markets with South Korea, Japan, they jumped to fresh record highs. We see the Nikkei up 1.65% to 71,053 points. Very strong one. Kospi in South Korea, 2.25% of 9,063 points. And the Hang Seng in China, 1.59% down. Shanghai index in mainland China is also down. And we see India in the green territory at the close of trade. But before we go to other markets, let's take a quick break. Capital Business Incorporated will be right back. And let's turn our attention now to Berlin for a look at how European markets are trading today. Deutsche Welle correspondent Chiponda Chimbelu is standing by. Chiponda, how are EU shares trading today?
Well, Will, European shares have been trading lower today, and the Pan-European Stock 600 is actually down 0.5%, and the DAX is flat. Now, investors are increasing bets on a U.S. Federal Reserve interest rate hike after new Fed Chair Kevin Warsh struck a hawkish tone in his first interest rate decision on Wednesday. But of course, easing oil prices are helping to temper inflation concerns for now, after the United States and Iran signed that peace agreement to end the Iran war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. So what we are seeing on markets today is energy price sensitive stocks like airline stocks like Lufthansa and Air France rise, and the shares of aircraft manufacturer Airbus too are up. And in macroeconomic news, well, the Macroeconomic Policy Institute here in Germany has said that the German economy will grow less than previously expected. And of course, that is just the latest downgrade for Europe's biggest economy.
And so, just look at another topic right now. We're seeing the majority of EU lawmakers are backing new legislation that would allow EU farmers to use certain genetically edited crops. And now the move is expected to ease the existing restrictions we had seen on the genetically modified crops within the bloc. Chiponda, what can you tell us about this new legislation?
Well, Will, it actually comes after 3 years of negotiations, and now a majority of EU lawmakers have backed legislation that approves food from crops created with new genome editing techniques. So those are so-called NGTs. Now, NGTs make it actually possible to create crops that are more resistant to disease or drought more precisely than the methods used before 2001, and that would reduce the need for pesticides and chemicals. Now, NGTs are more targeted when it comes to making changes to crops, but here in Europe, food made from NGT crops has been basically treated like genetically modified organisms, so GMOs. So they've been subjected to the same rules that regulate GMOs, and that has pretty much meant that they've been banned in the European Union. And now it looks like the EU legislation is ready to catch up and regulate gene editing in crops as well. But as the EU prepares to allow them here, the new legislation meant to regulate them is already causing controversy.
So has there been any reaction so far to this new legislation?
Well, there are fears about the unpredictable impact that the gene-edited crops may have on the environment and food chains. And here in Germany, the Environment Minister, Carsten Schneider, has described the legislation as a serious mistake. He said that supply chains are needed to ensure that genetically modified crops and products can be distinguished from food that is entirely organic, so without any changes to its genome. Now, Foodwatch, which is a consumer rights lobby, called the legislation a gift to the agricultural lobby. But of course, there are also countries that have been pushing for more relaxed rules for the use of gene-edited crops, and they have welcomed the legislation. And in that, we also see the Danish government as an example. It has said that it will allow its agricultural industry to be more competitive and more sustainable and resilient to climate change. But while food from gene-edited crops is actually already available in some markets across the world, it will still take some time for it to land in European supermarkets. And that is because EU countries will have up to 2 years to formally adopt the legislation.
Thank you so much, Iponda. I had a mouthful there trying to say gene-edited crops. I'm just imagining trying to eat a meal and I'm saying gene-edited meals. But thank you so much, Iponda, for your insights. For the right thing, Berlin.
As long as it tastes good, that's all that matters, bro, right?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you a lot. So now let's turn to the crypto space and see how that is faring today. Still red. We're seeing that 0.55% down for Bitcoin, $64,452,000. And we're seeing Ethereum is in the green, however, up 0.26%, $1,754.71. XRP is in the red, BNB in the red. But let's see what other stories are making headlines in that space. We see cryptocurrency exchange Bybit says it is engaging with the Monetary Authority of Singapore after learning that Bybit Fintech Limited has been placed on the regulator's investors alert list. And the exchange says it is seeking clarification on the basis for the listing and maintains that it has measures in place to prevent access by Singapore users, including geo-blocking Singapore IP addresses and restrictions in its terms of service. Bybit adds that it does not offer services in Singapore and remains committed to working constructively with regulators worldwide. Next up, we see the cryptocurrency market is extending its losses. As I mentioned that already, the U.S. Federal Reserve that decided to keep interest rates unchanged, and that's signaling that possibility of further tightening. Bitcoin, we mentioned already, is slipping below $65,000. We're keeping an eye on what's happening in that space. Value is falling 3%. It's just for market watchers to know. Liquidations are also surging by about 65%. That's just give you further a deeper dive on what's happening in the background. Futures are open. Futures open interest is also easing with tokens including Uniswap, DIX, and Aerodrome Finance dropping more than 10%. And that's a wrap on Business Incorporated. I'm Will Ibong. I'll see you tomorrow.